Ibby, welcome to the second 319 Climate Innovating Climate Conversation. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
Um,
Rob.
so, look, I'm going to give you an introduction. Ibby, obviously, Ibby Ibrahim Almufti. You're the principal at Arup, which is a global consulting engineering firm where you founded the risk and resilience practice. You have a background in seismic engineering and resilience. You are the lead author and developer of the READY rating system, which is a resilience-based design approach to allow buildings and infrastructure to be more resilient against natural hazard events while minimizing costs and improving safety. I'm interested in digging in with you about the leadership role that you took in the new taxonomy for risk and resilience assessments that we'll get into. At Arup, you've led significant projects from seismic design of towers in San Francisco through to climate risk and resilience assessments for critical infrastructure in the South Pacific, through to resilient strategies for Fortune 100 companies. And your work integrates advanced simulation, modeling, risk analysis and design, and operational strategies. And then over the last few years, you've been leading the development of a software platform called Iris that harnesses digital innovation to better quantify risk down to the bolts of a building so the owners, developers, and investors can better prioritize resilience investments. With a focus on combining cutting-edge digital technology, data analysis, and design, Ibby, I hope you don't mind me saying so, but you continue to be a leader in advancing resilience in the built environment.
Thank you, Rob.
Uh, Oh, of course. Look, we had the privilege of working together
Yeah, we
when I
did.
was with Arup, and because you think, I mean, you think deeply about these issues. You're always looking to innovate. I always enjoy spending time with you, and always feel a little bit smarter as a result. So, Ibby, how are you? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think you got it right. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Well, look, you too. Look, before we get into the technical questions, I've got a bunch of things I want to ask you. I just want to ask you about really what drives you to innovate, Ibby.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rob, and I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I'll take it way back to my childhood. So I grew up in the Bay Area, and I lived through the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. And I remember my mother had taken my brother and I to the art supply store, and we were inside, and the shaking started. And we were, we were taught at the time to go into the door frame, to protect yourself. And I remember vividly, I was a young boy at the time, that a woman had already got there, rather large woman, and it blocked the door. And so we had to get out underneath her and through her. And there was a parking lot. We were in like, a strip mall area, and there was a parking lot with cars there. And it's hard to describe, but I can only describe it as like an ocean, like
Ha,
waves, like tall waves. And this was in the East Bay, so we were, I don't know, hundreds of, not hundreds, tens of kilometers away from like the epicenter. But I remember that vividly, and it was terrifying. And then about a month later, um, I think what maybe set me on this path is I remember my father took my brother and I to Oakland, to the collapsed Nimitz Freeway where many people died,
mm,
and we stood there, and I just remember what, like, I think I didn't know it then, maybe subconsciously, I want to do something about that. Like, how can I help prevent these types of disasters in the future? And that, eventually I studied structural engineering at UCLA, and then seismic engineering at Berkeley, where I got my master's, and set me on the path. And then I started working for Arup, and I actually got to put that into practice.
ha. Oh, I mean, that origin story. Thanks, Ibby, for sharing it. And how did that sort of passion for wanting to improve? How did that transition then from pure seismic into multi-hazard and then multi-hazard with climate on top?
Yeah, it's a good question. So early in my career, again, I was mostly doing seismic engineering, structural design, and I remember thinking, why are we designing buildings this way? To
Mm,
modern building codes, and many people don't know this, but we're basically designing these buildings to be damaged after buildings. And really that's a mechanism to dissipate energy and so on, with the sole intent of making sure the buildings are life safe. So getting people out of the building. But the problem is the buildings might not be usable afterwards. We're
mm,
designing these $100 million structures like $30,000 cars, right? You can walk away from the car crash, but it's totaled. So I came up with this new approach, resilience-based design. It took me, I don't know, a year or two within Arup. Arup was very supportive, had a lot of multidisciplinary support, internal and external from Arup, and we published the Ready rating system for seismic design. And then we developed within that a risk modeling approach for seismic. FEMA had just completed a 10-year research study that allowed us to get into like the nuts and bolts of a building to actually predict how different components of a building would be damaged to a certain extent. And then we put a wraparound around that to translate that to things like building downtime, like, business ready metrics that
mm,
organizations could understand. And we parlayed that into working with a number of West Coast organizations to help them quantify their seismic risk on their campuses or world headquarters and develop resilience strategies for them. And then about, I would say, 5 or 6 years ago now, Rob, they started asking about climate. And so one by one, we just adapted what we were doing in the seismic world to flood, hurricane, tornado, wildfire. Now we just finished heat. And so I would say the approach we've taken is quite different than maybe the rest of the market, which is more of the kind of top-down data sciencey side. We're really coming at it from an engineering first principles approach, coming at it from the ground up components of the building. How did each one of those get damaged and so on. So we've been able to leverage that into doing holistic multi-hazard risk climate risk assessments and resilience strategies that encompass all those hazards as well.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, as you know, EB, I'm a lapsed geologist, so the
Yeah.
thought of actually, coming from the ground up, of course, resonates. Um, Look, one of the things that I know that you're passionate about is being able to describe what you're doing and the work that you're doing with clients in a way that can resonate more broadly, and then from there can then actually um, prompt stimulate systemic change, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you talked about that with Ready. Let's just pivot a little bit now onto the new taxonomy, if we
Mm.
could for a second. Can you just give us a little bit of a high level about what it is, and then we can dig into some of the specific aspects.
Yeah, so we published, and let me make sure I get the name right. I think we called it a universal taxonomy for natural hazard and climate risk and resilience assessments. It's a mouthful. And you can download it if you go to Google and type in Arup risk taxonomy, it should come up. And essentially what it does is it outlines um, a few different what we call risk classes, progressively more detailed, that essentially answer different questions that customers, clients, organizations want, from high level awareness, where you can do something like a hazard screening assessment. We call that a class 0, all the way to what we call class 3, the component level modeling, which unlocks really kind of deep insights into what should you retrofit to what level, and really can turn into like shovel ready projects. And there's a bunch of stuff in between the class 1 and class 2. So we thought that was really important to put out there in the market because it's kind of like the Wild West out there right now with climate risk. Like, what is climate risk and how do you do climate risk assessment? So we were finding that a common language was missing, and so we were looking to put something out there that could be used, to really bring some stability, I guess, to that chaos.
Mm. So that sounds like a key motivator, right? To actually be so that when clients or prospective clients, but more broadly the market understands, so that when one organization is saying, "Hey, we can do a climate risk assessment for you," and another organization is saying the same thing, that in fact you're able to go, well, compare apples to apples. Is that right, Ibi?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we were finding even internally at Arup, when we had clients asking our team in London, for example, to deliver climate risk assessments, or asking my team in San Francisco, we weren't delivering the same thing, even internally, right? And so And these clients were asking for slightly different things. So again, some might need the information just to kind of raise awareness within their organization. Some need it to strategically plan how they're going to invest in capital, planning.
Right.
And so that's a different level of assessment. And then the market is flooded, I think, with a lot of climate SaaS solutions that promise a lot of things, but at the end of the day, they're really kind of in what we'll call the class 0 or 1 level. You can maybe use it for awareness. You can even get some quantitative metrics out of it, but it's what we're finding is that it stops well short of informing any sort of action, at least with any confidence. And so that
Mm,
the nice thing about the taxonomy is it kind of allows um, call them users in these organizations to like support what they should be asking consultants for. And so it helps that alignment. It also for us internally help us align our research initiatives and the way we talk about you know risk assessment, resilience strategy, and so on. Like what level are we doing? What is the client asking for? So it's been helpful in that regard as well.
mm. And so just walk us through that a little bit. You mentioned class zero, class one, class two, class three. Can you just give us a
Yeah.
quick thumbnail about what each of
What is
those levels are, with classes
Yeah,
are?
yeah, yeah. So class 0 is basically what we'll call a hazard and exposure assessment. And by the way, I'm talking about buildings right now. So the taxonomy, it's the buildings edition. So we do have other plans to kind of expand that.
Mhm.
But for buildings and building portfolios, a class 0 assessment is a hazard and exposure assessment. Like what are the hot spots in across your buildings? You're not really taking into account the building vulnerability, which as an engineer is key for risk. And actually, maybe stepping back, I should say, what is risk? Risk is the likelihood of experiencing some consequence. So for buildings, it could be and organizations that use buildings to deliver their core services or their mission. You're talking about business interruption and downtime. You're talking about financial losses and lost revenues. You're talking about life safety and health and wellness outcomes
Mhm.
for their people. And so that's risk. A lot of the market, like I was saying, especially in the SaaS space, is doing hazard and exposure only. They're not really bringing in the impact on the building side. We call that a class 0. That's enough for like maybe pre-screening, maybe very high level awareness, but not much more than that. And then a class 1, you need to bring in some elements of what the building is. So, you need to understand what the occupancy type is, where the building is, what it's made out of. And then you're starting to marry the hazard with how the building might respond to that hazard. So hazard is the likelihood of experiencing a certain intensity of wind speed or ground shaking, right, or flood depth. So we can translate that into impacts. So at a class 1 level, still fairly high level.
Mhm.
And then class 2 is where you start moving into more of the engineering based assessment. You're going to have
And you
someone with professional qualifications looking at the building and understanding in detail for that specific building
right.
how it might respond.
And then, sorry to interrupt you, but
No
the
worries.
idea then is that you're screening. If you're actually going through this process, then by the time you actually then get to class two, and then to class three, I want you to talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
You've been through this really rigorous prioritization process, right? And by the time you get down to there, you're really focusing on what the key risks are. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So I kind of try to describe it as a resilience journey that these organizations are taking. And it really doesn't matter what type of organization it is. We see the same thing. So at the first step, you're trying to understand just high level awareness. I want to do some screening. How bad is it in
Mhm.
general? And then you can start to isolate a subset of buildings and hazards that might warrant more assessment because we've identified them as posing potentially elevated risks. And so you can move into a class 1 or class 2 level of assessment from that, get some quantification, get some more confidence, and then you can start developing strategies around that, whether those are physical interventions at the building level or operational interventions at the organizational level. You're trying to figure out ways, candidate, let's call it options for how you might build resilience into your business. And then what we like to do is sometimes for the like most costly decisions, get into really detailed modeling at the building component level. But we don't always have to. But using this information to test out different resilience strategies, quantify the risk reduction, like how much, um, what's the likelihood of experiencing a certain amount of downtime now? What if I did this? And then, because we understand how much it costs to do these things, we can
Mhm.
quantify the ROI and help organizations prioritize investment.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you said this to me once. You called this the "so what then what"
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. The so
sort of
what? Yeah.
journey. Yeah, and look, one of the things I like about the taxonomy is that it does this lays out the different classes, but then actually has sections there on the user personas.
Mm.
Um, can you just talk about that for a second and what like why you did that and then what they are?
Yeah, so in the I think in the appendix of the taxonomy, I want to say there's about 9 or 10 user personas which outline kind of nuanced use cases and when people need or organizations need climate risk assessments, what are they using the information for? And it so depending on what they want to use the information for, that helps them align with what type of assessment they should be asking for and what the typical resilience journey is. So in the user personas, I think we have, someone at a corporate who needs to understand, for reporting, but also going beyond reporting, what to do. We have people in governmental positions, so at a like kind of a regional level, what information you would need. So I think it just makes it more tangible for the
Mhm.
people that are, asking for climate risk assessments for their organizations, and hopefully, and I've heard feedback that it's been useful for those people.
Yeah, that was actually the next question. I mean, how's it been received? I mean, it was released when? Oh,
I think it was released in May. I could be
yeah,
wrong, but I think it was
recently.
before, yeah, just before the summer.
Mhm.
And we've gotten really good feedback. I mean,
Oh,
there's so
great.
much, I think, feedback that I probably haven't heard. But it comes up a lot now in conversations with clients. Even someone told me the other day when I was at New York Climate Week, this is a developer. Said, "Hey, I read your taxonomy. It's great. Like it's really what we're looking for." So we designed it to bring this like standard common language so that I'm a consultant or a vendor, so I can have that conversation with the client side, the organizations that need this information to do better. So I'm hoping that it really has, connected those dots.
Oh, great. And so what's next, Ibby? What's next for the taxonomy? You alluded to some new additions or some spin-offs.
Yeah, so we're kind of flirting with the idea of, I mean, like I said, it was a buildings edition, so you can imagine we can do the same thing for infrastructure, whether that's linear infrastructure like utilities and roads, or whether it's like big pieces of hard infrastructure. We're thinking about doing it for communities as well, community resilience, bringing in the social equity aspects as well. So there's a lot of ideas floating around, and I think again the feedback on the initial version has been um, it's been well received. So I think it justifies us looking to expand it.
All right. Well, look, good on you. I mean, like I said, I'm a user. Congratulations on the work
Thank you.
on getting it out there. I think being able to actually speak the same language is so critical. Obviously, with my own accent too, it's something that I sort of often riff off program, potato, and so on. But just actually being able to use the language both in the market and then within organizations, so that those are then responsible for enhancing resilience can then actually have informed conversations with others. And for me, I think that's one of the things I recommend the taxonomy to for those internal conversations.
Absolutely.
Um, and we'll make sure that we get links to being able to download this later. Okay, look, what I want to do is I just want to change gear a little bit and talk about your work in the digital product space, and particularly how you've been using software and now AI to help deliver climate risk and resilience services, Ibby.
Yeah. So yeah, it's exciting times, I would say. So when we started working with organizations, like I mentioned, mostly on the West Coast, primarily for seismic, we were quantifying seismic risk across hundreds of buildings. And what we were realizing early days was, well, there's a lot of data, right, that's coming in. You need to store that data somewhere. You need to run the models. So, you're running quite sophisticated computer simulations to let's call it virtually stimulate the impacts of earthquakes and then now other natural hazards as well on the built environment. So it requires a lot of compute. And early days, we were doing things in spreadsheets and we were kind of hacking together, computer code, and then delivering PDF reports, like big PDF reports to our clients. And then you kind of realize pretty quickly that those become fairly obsolete overnight because their portfolios are changing. They're either acquiring new buildings, building new buildings, they're divesting from some, they're demolishing some, they're retrofitting others. And then the hazards are changing, especially with climate change. Everything's changing so fast. The science is evolving. And so we realize because of all these things, we really need a digital platform. And it needs to be dynamic. It needs to be able to store data. It needs to be able to run the simulations up in the cloud. It needs to be able to make the information digestible for our clients as well. And then it needs to be able to track resilience over time, right? Again, for the reasons I was saying, your properties are changing, the hazards are changing, and ideally you're trying to bend this curve of risk down across your organization. That's a multi-year, maybe multi-decade effort to do that. So it just made a lot of sense to develop something like the Iris platform that we have. And it also, I think, from an internal standpoint, it standardizes and provides a consistent method for us to deliver climate risk assessments to a class 0 level, to a class 1 level, to a class 2 or a class 3 level. And that's how it ties back to the taxonomy. So our risk methodologies and our engines for each of our hazards, we have a version for each of those. And so if a client comes to me and they say, hey, Ibbi, I want a portfolio climate risk assessment, there's hundreds of assets spread out here. What do you need it for? Well, I need it to report, but I also need to start to understand how I'm going to take action. Okay, then I would suggest a class 1 risk assessment to start off with. And then let's take a subset of flagged risks and move into a class 2. We can do that all on platform and then provide the results to our clients. They can explore, they can view, compare, filter, and so on. So yeah, it just made a lot of sense to put it on a digital platform.
And is that thanks, Ibby. And so is that a typical use case? You have clients coming forward with a multi-building, multi-asset portfolio, presumably in different geographies, right? Exposed to different hazards. And is that like use case number one?
That's pretty much that's a very typical use case. We have use cases where, let's say, data center clients want to understand like how does a single hurricane event, how might that impact all of my data centers simultaneously? So we call that shared fate risk. Same at a campus, at a large campus, what would happen if one earthquake hit, or again a storm hit? What would happen across my campus? And then the other things that we get into is we call them on-demand assessments. So especially with mission critical facilities, they're looking for new sites and they have to make decisions pretty quickly. That site, that site, or that site. So we're helping with that. We help with technical due diligence for acquisitions of new properties, and increasingly, Rob, and I think this is exciting. There's exciting times in the climate risk and adaptation world. It's starting to become a priority for these clients to understand not only what the risks are in business ready metrics, like I said,
Mhm.
how much might it cost to mitigate? They're actually thinking about these things, even if they're short-term
Right.
holders of the properties, they know that their next buyer is probably going to be starting to think about it. So we were at the very nascent beginnings of this kind of climate risk, market demand, but we're seeing it growing quite rapidly.
Yeah, look into that point. I mean, that's what's exciting you in this space? Maybe it sounds like it is. You're actually seeing that transition from assessment into action, and then mainstreaming into the organizations you're working for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think my excitement as kind of a technical person, especially, and an engineer at heart, is like, wow, we have methods now that can get into the level of detail needed to inform resilience and adaptation measures, and we can actually quantify how those measures are going to pay off or not. And you couldn't say that probably a few years ago. So I think our technology is quite innovative, and I'm very excited about how do we leverage that to help organizations spend, the limited budgets they have on, resilience and adaptation to basically make it pay back. What's the biggest bang
Mm.
for your buck? So that excites me. I'm really excited also about um, how the taxonomy and the methods that we've created, how could that unlock a better connection between resilience of your buildings, retrofits of your buildings, or even better risk information about your buildings, and better, more innovative insurance products that incentivize resilience. And I think I would call that I call that the holy grail. I don't think that exists. Well, I know that doesn't exist right now, and that's because there's lots of reasons why the insurance models can't get into that level of detail. Um, but I do believe that with all these losses mounting up, we're still seeing the remnants of Milton as an example. Everyone's going to be incentivized to build in more resilience. The insurers and reinsurers, the insurance brokers, the corporations, the
The lenders,
organizations, the
lenders.
lenders, everyone. And so I do think that my excitement is being able to bring kind of everything around the taxonomy, the modeling capabilities, and so on to help unlock that.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I know that you were really active at New York Climate Week. I mean, that
Mm,
certainly was a trend for me. It's like, okay, we've been in the risk and resilience space focused very much on downside risk for all the reasons we've
yeah.
just been talking about for such a long time. Like, okay, now the models, the approaches, the methodologies that have been used to really get a handle on downside risk also then provide them the platform of really looking at upside opportunity as well. And that sounds like something that is really energizing you in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I think communication of risk is key here, right? And I think, what I see my place as helping, people, organizations, communities understand like what is the risk actually, and how can I be confident in taking action? Because it's pretty easy to be overwhelmed, stick your head in the sand and not do anything, throw up your arms and say this is too much. But I think what I like to try and communicate to our clients is no, there are things you can do, and some of them are low-hanging fruit, and you can do it incrementally. You don't have to do it overnight, but over time it's going to start to make a real difference, and that's what counts.
Yeah, oh, that's really well said. And I think too, Ibby, that one of the other trends, certainly for me, coming out from New York Climate Week, was this sense of the corporate clients really beginning to get a handle on their risks, and then thinking about, well, actually, how can they then work together to enhance systemic resilience with
Hmm.
public sector partners, with community partners, and so on. And I think too, then that comes back a lot to the language, the approaches that are used, and the ability to be able to do that in a shared way. And in that sense, I mean, how do you see the emerging climate risk disclosure space emerging too, Ibby?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me hopeful. I think there's a bit of cynicism that that's just a kind of a reporting mechanism, like a check the box thing. And I think that's going to be the case for some organizations. It is going to be a check the box exercise. And honestly, if that's what it is, then a lot of the solutions in the market are available to do that. But I think there's a lot more understanding now than there was 5 years ago, or even a few years ago, that it's more than just reporting and awareness. Like that climate change is an existential threat to organizations, their delivery of their core services. Like, how do you preserve that mission? And I think I would say all of the organizations that are our clients are looking to go beyond just the kind of understanding, and they want to take action, voluntarily take action. So I know this is a mandatory disclosure. So I think it's going to get a lot of people off the sideline to start the journey. And my hope, and my experience is that many of those organizations are going to move beyond that into how do we adapt, how fast, where, what do we need to do about it? And I think for that, you do, you really need these different types of assessments that I've been talking about to get you through that journey.
Yeah, that's well said, Ibby. Look, I could talk to you for hours. But of course we have in the past. But look, time is short, so I'm going to start to wrap up. You talked a little bit about being able to find your work. Could you just again repeat where we could actually find for the viewers and listeners to be able to get hold of this fantastic work, Ibby?
You know what, Rob, is funny is like I feel like we don't do a good job of externally like putting stuff out there. My LinkedIn is a good resource actually, or you can so I do post I think on what I find the hot topics of the day, and you can always ping me. The risk class taxonomy is available on the web. Ready is also available for people to download, and we've got a version for earthquakes, extreme winds, and flooding. So that's resilience-based design of
Mhm.
new construction or major retrofits. So I think that's www.ready.arup.com. Um, and so, yeah, there's resources out there. And I think, otherwise, yeah, LinkedIn is probably a good way to catch me.
Yeah, wonderful. And you do have the advantage of having a very easily Googleable name too. If you say
Yeah,
it doesn't take very long to put those combinations of words
yeah. There's
together
not
with.
many Ibis, not many Ibis out there.
Well, not many Ibbi Almuftis working in this space.
Yeah, yeah.
Look, look, Ibbi, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you as always. Thank you for spending time with us on our second 319 Innovating Climate conversation. Thanks, Ibbi.
Thank you, Rob. Always a pleasure.